According to the latest Consumer Price Index report from the National Bureau of Statistics, Nigeria's inflation rate for the month of July 2021 dropped further to 17.38% compared to 17.75% recorded in June 2021. Now, this clearly represents 0.37% decline in the rate of inflation compared to the previous month. The recent data also indicates a fourth consecutive decline in inflation rates despite the subtle decline recorded in the review month. Prices of goods and services increased significantly as the CPI surged by 17.38% compared to the corresponding period of 2020. Food inflation, the major component of the headline figure, eased 80 basis points from the previous month to 21.03% in July as core inflation, excluding prices of farm produce, rose 63 basis points to 13.72%. Despite the country's inflation rate declining for the fourth month in a row since April 2021, the indicator remains high as domestic inflation rate has shed as much as 39 basis points, moderating the most in July and beating the expectation of several economists who have estimated that inflation figures will be in the region of 17.6%. Well, to talk about this and, of course, other issues, I have joining me live from our Abuja studios is the senior economist at SPM Professionals, Mr. Paul Alaje. Mr. Alaje, good afternoon, and it's good to see you today. Well, I cannot hear you, Mr. Paul. If you can hear me, good afternoon.
You. I don't know if you can hear me.
Good, I can hear you.
Good afternoon, and thank you so very much for having me.
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. 17.38% from 17.75% in the month of June, down 0.37%. That's the decline we've seen for the fourth consecutive month. 1, 2, 3, 4. What is happening? Something is happening on the positive side. Or how does this come to you, Mr. Paul?
Now, when you talk about composite price index, or when you talk about CPI, headline inflation compares to what happened this time last year. When you look at last year, 2020, prices are relatively higher because of the lockdown, extended lockdown, partial lockdown. There was market seizure, which was evident in demand seizure and supply seizure at the time, and gradual reopening of the economy also necessitated high prices. It does not mean that the prices are cheap now or things are better off, but we are saying that when we compare what we have now, when we compare it to what the prices were this time last year, it seems to have increased at a reducing rate. And I need to stress that. It's not saying that inflation has fallen. It's saying inflation increased at a reducing rate. Because when you have 17, it means there is an increase by 17%. But when you compare it with what happened this time last year, we can say that we have a relatively lower rate when you compare that with July and June. In June, when you compare June 2021 to June 2020, we had 17.75%. But when you compare July, that's when 2021 compared with July 2020, then we had 17.38%. So we can say that inflation is increasing at a reducing rate. That would be a better way to put it.
Now, like I added to my question earlier, I am wondering, what are the things we're getting right? There have been some interventions by the Central Bank of Nigeria, notable ones: agriculture, creative sector, ICT space. What is playing out? What could be directly responsible for the decline? When we look at food, we are yet to see that decline in the day-to-day buyings, talking about food stuff and all of that. So what is really happening? Are we feeling the impact of these interventions? Or are we through the transition period? Because I said there's supposed to be a transition period.
Well, to a large extent, I say that first, one of the major things we got right is not locking down the economy again. Check out all the economies that practice lockdown. When I say lockdown, put their people in their homes, allow only essential workers to go to work or to work. They've had much higher inflation relative to what they were before COVID. Before COVID, Nigeria already has some level of high inflation. So, but when you compare those countries to what the inflation figures were, and you compare the economic growth, you see that Nigeria is relatively better off because we refused to lock down during the second wave of COVID and the ongoing third wave. It's one of the best decisions we've taken. The truth is that there have been interventions from government, which includes intervention in agri sector, among other sectors. They also have their own impact. The Central Bank of Nigeria have also said they're going to support fiscal authority in combating slow growth rates. Now, all of these have made production to happen. And when production happens and you have significant supply, while demand remains constant, it has influence on price. So price is although will increase, but the rate of increase, because there are other factors such as insecurity, logistic challenges, and so on and so forth, but the rate of increase has not been as high as we experienced it this time last year when you compare June 2020 with June 2021. When you compare that with what happened in July 2021 and 2020, when you compare the two basis year with this year, then I can tell you that to a large extent we are doing relatively better.
Now, looking at states, I'm also interested in the figures from states' inflation figures. We see Kogi State, 22.47% increase, while Kwara seems to be the lowest, doing 14.53%. What could also be responsible for this, Mr. Laji?
Well, to a large extent, when you look at what drove those states, particularly food inflation in those states, among other inflation, some of them rural, some of them urban factor. I think authorities in Kogi State need to do more, and this is beyond what Central Bank can do, even though Central Bank remains the head in terms of monetary conversation in the country. But the presence of government, the impact of government in Kogi State seems to be relatively scarce. I've said it here time and again, and I'm still repeating it. I would expect Kogi to maximize opportunity of their nearness to the Federal Capital Territory. We are yet to see that in the state. What I've seen more is to prove that that is just only in politics. When it comes to the impact on the life of people in Kogi State, then we still desire much. For Kwara State, among other states, that seems to be experiencing relatively low inflation, it is because when you look at most of the economic activity in those areas, it has improved, particularly in terms of pricing. And Kwara State in recent time have not experienced that high inflation compared to most of the states. So the authorities in Kwara and also the business community in Kwara seems to have found a way to make price to be relatively the same or grow, increase at relatively lower rate. That's talking about inflation. But in Kogi State, the state for some time now has maintained very, very high price. So it could be that people are not getting supply. It could be that those producing are hiking price beyond what it should be. Or it could also be that production capacity in the state is abysmally low.
Very soon, we're expecting GDP figures to also come in, and a lot of considerations with regards to the figures we should be expecting. President Buhari and the federal government has also said that 10 million people should be taken out of poverty. I think it's going to be 1 million a year. I'm looking at all of this because we need inclusive growth for us to actually feel the impact of these figures. Mr. Paul, how do you see government actualizing all of this?
I recall that 12th June 2019, the president mentioned for the first time that we are going to be seeing 100 million people taken out of poverty in 10 years. In 12th June 2020, Mr. President had repeated that same conversation. But IMF and World Bank, on the contrary, reported that perhaps 5 more million Nigerians joined the poverty line at the end of June in 2020, and they are even more worried that we are going to see about another 5 million are joined at the end of 2020. What it means is that those who are the drivers of Mr. President's policy, they need to consider key areas that can help people get out of the shackles of poverty. Government have continued to try to promote policies to help the poorest of the poor, but without providing economic activity that will make the people to be self-sufficient without depending on answers either from politicians or from government or for whosoever. What can give them decent pay for those that want to work and those that want to be entrepreneurs or small businesses? When we build the right economy and right environment for them, then that is when we can say that we are lifting people out of poverty. That does not mean that people have not been brought out of poverty at all, but when you find the net, we seem to be having more excess in millions of people, perhaps rather than coming out of poverty, they seems to be trapped in poverty. And for the figures, UNDP in 2018 says more than 80 million Nigerians live not just under poverty, but under multidimensional poverty. IMF put the figure at 42% of about 200 million people. That is bigger than population of Ghana. That is bigger than population of Sierra Leone, bigger than population of some countries. That means Nigeria perhaps has warehoused countries of people that live less than $2 in a day. So, but what can we do, which is the real conversation? For all countries our organization have studied, and those we are still studying, the fundamentals, the first thing that should be done, the real foundation for bringing people out of poverty, so that some of the policy Mr. President and his team are promoting can show and can have right impact on Nigerians. The first thing is power supply. Power and energy must be available and affordable for small businesses to access. What that means is, particularly for the period of production, I know we cannot magically provide light 24 hours between now and December, for instance, but there is something we can do. We can find policy working with different distribution companies to say for production areas, we want to target certain number of hours where producers are producing commodities and goods so that we can have more and more people engaged and more production. We can help those that are producing. Name it, Manufacturer Association of Nigeria will be key stakeholder, or chambers of commerce around Nigeria. They will be key stakeholders for government to know that the first thing to do for these people, particularly those that are producing and those that are employing, how do we guarantee, how do we make environment to be relatively stable for them so that production can take place? The next to that will be infrastructure, which is evident in rail, and I must say that our government seems to have done a masterpiece in Ibadan to Lagos, which is Lagos-Ibadan rail project. Very fine, work is still ongoing. I've been there a number of times to witness that. But how do we repeat it? Perhaps with the support of Ministry of Transport, or we need to put more in Ministry of Transport for ministry to see how to connect Port Harcourt to Maiduguri, connect Maiduguri to Kano or Jos to Kaduna, Kaduna back to Kaduna to Kano, you know, connect the whole country in terms of infrastructure. That will bring prices of commodity, which is the core conversation today, really low, because you don't need to depend on fossil fuel. And government, anytime we hear from what information available in the media, that governors are pushing for removal of subsidy, and in fact more Nigerians are pushing for removal of subsidy. But the concern that authorities may have is what will happen to those who earn 30,000 naira minimum wage, and those in the private sector who don't even earn up to that. Big concern for authorities. For us and our organization, we feel very strongly that the faster government can find solutions to infrastructure and put more money on rail projects, partner with states. For instance, Lagos is looking at red line and blue line. How do we get more states with high population, such as Kano State, you know, and some others like River State, to plug into this project so that we can move our people, and more importantly, cargo goods, rather than moving them on the road, we may need to now move them perhaps on the rail, particularly because of insecurity. That is one. Two, we need to do more in terms of provision of road. Beyond federal, we need to look at state, we need to look at local government, and more importantly, public-private partnership. Now, infrastructure, particularly in this regard, are so very important for the impact of government to show. The real employer of labor will be in housing. If we can build 100,000 houses every year for the next 10 years, we can perhaps reduce our unemployment figures, which is put at 33.3%, by not less than 25 to 33%. That is by 1/4 to about 1/3, if we can deploy massive housing projects. We see what is going on in Abuja through the effort of private sector. But how do we repeat the same in different states of the federation? We know any capacity are not equal. We may not be looking at what an average house, I beg your pardon, will cost in Abuja, to compare that with what will cost in Sokoto or what it will cost somewhere in Imo. It may not be the same thing altogether. But the point here is that authorities through National Economic Council, or to involve some level of local authorities, need to put more in times of investment. If you don't invest in this economy, I'm afraid you cannot lift 5 million or 2 million, or you manage to lift 1 million, which is 10% of the target of Mr. President, let alone 10 million out of poverty.
When we talk investment, I think so largely about that, because a lot of issues affecting investments, because you only put your money where you know your money is safe. So insecurity becomes something that we should really look at. Even the PIA that we've been talking about for days, we need a good and conducive environment for this investment to come in the way it should come in. Mr. Laje, what are you thinking, talking about investment at this time? Do you think Nigeria will be that beautiful bride for investors?
Well, if for us to talk investment, one of the things we need the most, apart from private investment, is foreign direct investment. Once you discuss foreign, then we now need to talk about the power of Naira. For every economy that exports, or an economy that the rest of the world hopelessly depend on, as the case of China today, then to devalue such currency will make a lot of sense. But an economy that hopelessly depends on some countries around the world for import, it does not make economic sense for such economy to continue to devalue. Now, more so that this economy borrows in hard currency. I give you a figure. Nigeria added 1 trillion naira to debt without borrowing money between April to July. And these are not my figures. Debt Management Office revealed from the figures released, and you can find that on www.dmo.gov.ng. 1 trillion naira was added to our debt profile by not borrowing any money. It does not. It is compulsory that we must see the 1 trillion naira appear. Why? Because we devalued our currency at that time. Between those periods, the moment we devalued our currency, it has tremendous negative impact on our debt profile. On one hand, investors are concerned that when they bring their funds to Nigeria, don't let us even talk about security risk first. We are talking about the currency risk. What is the guarantee that when they want to leave the economy, the money they brought, they will get the same value? More so that Nigeria is not a dollarized economy. We spend naira here. That on one hand, which is so very important, is as important as security of life and property. We seem to have seen new energy from the part of government, while about 1,000 insurgents have surrendered. How can we continue to do right thing in this regard so that we can see more and more insurgents saying that they want to come to government, or they want to repent, and we have less and less of insecurity? Until we do this, the truth is that we'll be seeing investment in trickles, and we'll be seeing unemployment, poverty, and hunger in their numbers. And for us to say we want to reduce these figures, what we need to do is to increase investment, which will come from majorly foreign investment and local investment.
Wrapping up this interview now, one way or the other, poverty, unemployment, and insecurity, all of this are kind of interwoven. They kind of work hand in hand. One leads to the other. Now, Mr. Paul, let's project. We are grappling with the third wave of COVID-19, in particular the Delta variant, and we know what is happening. More than 1,000 infections, even for Nigeria today. More than 1,000 persons died in the United States yesterday, just in 24 hours. What effect do you see this having on the global space? Supply disruptions, production, manufacturing. Let's wrap up on that note.
Well, COVID, beyond becoming health concern, is more importantly an economic concern. A lot of theorists have even mentioned that COVID could be a weapon of war, but don't let us rest around that this moment. Maybe we should look at it in terms of number of people he has thrown into poverty, number of economy he has thrown into recession, and properly speaking, depression. Number of homes, it has taken their food, it has taken their jobs. And what will be the impact? The impact is quite obvious that the world will continue to be bothered about total number of people around the world that should have decent jobs that don't have, total number of factories that will be closed down, total number of lives that should have lived better and quality lives. But because of COVID-19, particularly the third wave, which has a different variant called the Delta variant. So the impact on the world and particularly around countries is tremendous, and we are seeing it. But what we need to do is the energy we displayed during the first wave should come back around the globe. Now that we have vaccines, a lot of our persons have been encouraged to go get back, to go take their jabs. Apart from that, how do we continue to champion and to talk more about government support, talking about non-pharmaceutical preventive method around the world, starting with Nigeria? So if government makes the policy, there was a time Kaduna State said it was going to start fining people for not putting on their face masks in public, in a public environment. We need to reintroduce some of these policies, because it is easy for people to forget without necessarily appearing as difficult and unnecessarily tough on people. But we need to protect lives, because the most important economic agent, it is not capital, it is human resources. When you have human can create capital, human can create, human become labors, and so on and so forth. So we need to do everything possible to protect life and first of all, and property of people. And this solely, I think, government can do. Nigeria did it correctly. Recently, Nigeria was rated #4 around the world when it comes to some of the activities we are taking around COVID. And that is kudos to authority, kudos to government. But what do we need to do more so that the number can start reducing this moment today?
It's a pleasure talking to you, Senior Economist, SPM Professionals, Mr. Paul Alaje. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.